Everyone at this billionaire's party saw the same thing. A black nanny, hands shaking as the owner of Cresttop stood over her and shouted into a microphone, "You're here because I allow it. I can throw you out with nothing." Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Phones tilted up as people recorded. To them, she was background. Staff. Just the help. What none of them knew was that the marble beneath their shoes, the hill under this mansion, the rock their cars climbed to reach this gate, didn't legally belong to him. It belonged to her. Because while he was counting guests and champagne bottles and brand deals, she'd been counting something else. Old signatures, missing files, and one quiet envelope her grandmother left behind that said half of his precious hill was never really his. Tonight, you'll see how a nobody nanny quietly became the landlord of a billionaire family, and how one forged signature nearly stole her grandmother's entire future. The first time, Flora Mensah heard she owned half of Cresttop. She was not sitting across from a lawyer in a glass office. She wasn't surrounded by contracts and assistants. She was wiping chocolate off a 6-year-old's face. Stephen Arma sat at the marble kitchen island, swinging his legs, a smear of dark chocolate attacking both cheeks and the tip of his nose. "Auntie Flora," he complained, "this cake is too big." "You are too small," she said. "Hold still. If you move, I will clean your ear by mistake." He giggled. "No, Auntie Flora, I need my ears." "You need your face more," she replied. "Your father's guests will think a small monster lives in Cresttop." That word, Cresttop, meant something different to everyone. To the city, it meant wealth. To the real estate agents, it meant exclusive. To politicians, it meant donor. To Flora, it meant a hill that used to be called useless land. Her phone buzzed twice in her apron pocket. She finished the last streak of chocolate, tilted Stephen's chin to inspect him, then turned to his older sister, Ya, hunched over homework at the corner of the island. "Ya, read this sentence again," Flora said gently. "You skipped a word." Ya corrected herself, cheeks dimpling when Flora nodded approval. Only then did Flora pull out her phone. Unknown number. One new message. "Ms. Flora Mensah, we have reviewed the documents you submitted regarding Parcel 7, Cresttop Hill. Please call this number at your earliest convenience." Her thumb hovered over the screen. For someone else, this would be spam. A random, "We have reviewed your documents" message from a dry government department. To Flora, it was the sound of land turning over in its sleep. Because long before this mansion, before the mirrored walls and imported marble and the infinity pool, there had been only red earth, rock, scrub, and a woman everyone in the old neighborhood called Abena who doesn't listen. Abena Mensah, Flora's grandmother. Flora remembered being 8 years old, sitting on Abena's veranda, watching her count crumpled notes from a wooden cash box. "Grandma, why are you selling the stall?" young Flora had asked. "Everyone buys from you. You're the best at shouting customers." Abena had chuckled. "I'm tired of shouting. I shouted for 30 years. Now my land will shout for me." "The land?" Abena pointed to a distant rise in the distance, a stubborn-looking hill where goats grazed and no one built anything. "See that?" she said. "They say it's useless. Too rocky. Too far. They want land by the main road. But roads move. Shops move. The land stays. One day they will beg to climb that hill." The neighbors had laughed at Abena when she sold her market stall and her small house to buy that hill. "Who will climb this place?" they jeered. "Go and buy land where the cars pass." Abena just smiled her quiet smile. "The cars will come. When they do, we must already be waiting." Years later, when Abena lay in a hospital bed, her voice thin, her skin paper dry, she pressed a worn envelope into Flora's hand. "If they ever touch this land without talking to you," she whispered, "this paper will find its voice. You may be small, but the land is not. Keep it safe, Flora." At the time, the hill was still empty rock. Then slowly the city crept closer. Then came roads, streetlights, interest. Then a company bought Cresttop Hill. Then, as if from nowhere, a mansion rose on top of it like a crown. Francis and Sharon Arma called it Cresttop. The billboards called it the house on the hill. The magazines called it Vision. No one called it Abena's Hill. Flora slipped her phone back into her pocket as the staccato tap of heels echoed in the corridor. Madame Sharon Arma entered the kitchen like she owned the air. Tall, flawless gold cuff on her wrist, phone in one hand, champagne flute in the other. She glanced around without really seeing. "Flora," Sharon said, eyes still on her screen. "The children need to be perfect tonight. No stains, no shouting, no running like market children. This is not that kind of house." "Yes, madam," Flora replied. Sharon finally looked up, her gaze sliding from Stephen to Ya to Flora. Her eyes paused briefly on Flora's navy dress. It was clean, well-fitted, modest. "It's fine," Sharon said, as if judging a tablecloth. "Just don't stand too close to the guests. Some of them are particular." She took a sip, checked her reflection in the glass oven door, and swept out. Flora's jaw tightened and released. She turned back to the children. "Finish your food," she said softly. "Then we go upstairs. Tonight is very long." As they ate, she drifted for a moment toward the huge glass wall at the end of the kitchen. Beyond it, Cresstop's floodlights already washed the hill in warm gold, turning rock and earth into something cinematic. It didn't look like the rough hill Abina had pointed at all those years ago, but Flora could still feel her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, hear that voice. "Land doesn't shout, it just waits." Flora had waited too. Waited through the day she saw bulldozers climbing the hill on the evening news. Waited when she took Abina's envelope to the land office and the clerk raised an eyebrow like she had said a joke. Waited when the file she opened with a young lawyer got delayed, then misplaced, then conveniently lost. Waited while men in suits told her she must be confused about boundaries. Now there was a text in her phone with the words Parcel 7 Cresstop Hill and documents you submitted and reviewed. For the first time in years, the waiting felt like something else. Movement. "Flora," Ya said softly, "you're staring outside." Flora blinked and smiled. "Sorry, I was thinking of your spelling," she lied. "Let's go upstairs." As she led the children away, she didn't know that in a few hours, in front of half the city's elite and thousands more online, Francis Arma would show her exactly what he thought she was worth. And by doing that, he would make the entire world listen when her land finally spoke. By 8 o'clock, Cresstop glowed like a promise. Valets jogged between imported cars. Security guards in crisp uniforms murmured into earpieces. A saxophonist on the pool deck let slow jazz drift into the cool evening air. Flora moved through it like a shadow that knew every corner. She'd been here before the walls were painted, before the paintings were hung, before the staff rota had its permanent names. Tray in hand, navy dress pressed, she slipped between clusters of guests in bright outfits and sharp suits. Most didn't see her at all. Some saw her and let their gaze slide past. A few saw her and then looked away quickly, the way people do when they're careful not to see the person pouring their drink. Across the room, Francis Arma stood by the balcony doors, large hand wrapped around a glass of something amber. He was in his element. Dark suit, watch that glittered every time he gestured, voice pitched just loud enough to dominate any circle he was in. "You have to understand," he was saying to a cluster of men. "Vision is lonely. Everyone told me this hill was useless. Rock, bush, but I don't see what is. I see what can be." He spread his arms theatrically, inviting the room to admire his prophecy fulfilled. "This was nothing," he said. "Now look." They looked. Chandeliers throwing light over polished wood. Glass doors opening to a balcony that framed the city lights below. Waiters moving with trays like silent choreography. They murmured their approval. Men like Francis fed on that sound. Near the children's corner, Flora knelt beside Stephen and Ya. "Auntie Flora," Stephen whispered, peering out. At the grown-ups, "Why is everyone shouting when the music is already loud?" "That's not shouting," Flora said with a small smile. "That is adults calling it networking." Ya smothered a laugh. "Will you stay when it gets loud? Stephen pressed. "I don't like when Daddy's friends laugh at everything." Flora's face softened. "I'll be around. If it gets too much, you come and find me. Deal?" "Deal," he said. In the hallway, she paused near the caterer's station to refill her tray with glasses. One of the caterers, a young man with tired eyes, glanced around Cresstop's gleaming interior and whistled low. "You're lucky, eh?" he said to Flora under his breath. To work here every day. See all this. Flora followed his gaze over the high ceilings, the art pieces that cost more than some houses, the curated perfection. Lucky, she echoed softly. If she told him she'd once stood on this hill when it was just rock and thin, grass. If she told him her grandmother used to say, "This will feed your children's children." If she told him the only reason she was in this house was because she refused to stop asking questions at the land office, he'd laugh. Or worse, he'd pity her. She lifted the tray instead. It was then she heard her name. Flora. Francis's voice cut through the music like it paid rent inside the speakers. He had moved to a small stage by the living room, where a mic and stand waited for his usual brief remarks. "Where is that nanny?" he boomed, turning his head. "Come, come." The band quieted down. Conversations paused. Dozens of faces turned to see which nanny had earned a summons. Flora felt every pair of eyes land on her as if they were weights. Her feet carried her forward almost on their own. She stepped toward the stage, tray still in hand, heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in her ears. "There she is," Francis announced, grinning wide. One hand beckoning her up. "The woman who spends more time with my children than their own mother." There was a little burst of laughter at that, half amused, half nervous. Sharon, standing by the bar with a group of women, smiled thinly, but didn't move. Francis put his arm around Flora's shoulders like they were friends, and he was doing her a favor. "People like her," he said into the mic, "come from nothing. But when they work in a house like this, they start to think they are something. You know that mentality?" The laughter sharpened, edges exposed. Flora's tray trembled slightly in her hands. The glasses chimed against each other in a small, embarrassed chorus. Her instinct screamed, "Step away." Her conditioning whispered, "Smile and endure." She chose neither. She kept her face neutral, eyes down, as if she had left her soul somewhere else for safekeeping. "Today," Francis continued, "we had a small disagreement. Flora wanted to correct my daughter in front of me, in my own house." He shook his head with theatrical disbelief. "I had to remind her who owns Cresttop." He turned fully toward her now, angling the mic so his words would be crystal clear, not just to the room, but to every phone already held up, recording. "You're here because I allow it," he said slowly, tasting every word. "I can throw you out with nothing." Silence fell like somebody had pulled sound out of the air. Then it shattered. Laughter. A few gasps. One voice near the front saying, "Ah, Francis, you're too much." Phones moved closer. On the staircase, Stephen had appeared at the railing, Ya beside him. "Why are they laughing at Auntie Flora?" he asked, voice small. No one answered him. Francis leaned down as if in a friendly gesture, not bothering to cover the mic. "Know your place," he hissed into Flora's ear. Up close, his breath smelled of expensive whiskey and power. He straightened, lifted his glass, and turned back to the room. "Anyway, let's enjoy the night. Music." The band obeyed, but the moment had already jumped from the room into the glowing screens in people's hands. In the confusion, Flora stepped off the stage, her fingers white against the tray, and walked straight to the kitchen. She set the tray down carefully, as if dropping it would be some kind of confession. A junior maid, eyes wide, whispered, "Sis, are you okay?" Flora didn't trust her own voice yet. She nodded once, then slipped out a side door to the far balcony, the one nobody used. Out there, the night air was cooler, less perfumed, more honest. She could see the base of the hill, where rougher ground still clung on, not yet polished by development. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A new voice message. She pressed play, holding it close to her ear. "Ms. Mensah," came the crisp voice of a woman. "This is DePa from the Lands Commission, following up on Parcel 7 Cresttop Hill. The investigation into the alleged transfer is almost complete. From our preliminary findings, your grandmother's claim still stands. There are irregularities that we cannot ignore. Please come to our office tomorrow morning. It looks serious." Flora watched the city lights for a long moment. Behind her, the music swelled. Someone laughed too loudly. A cork popped. "They think they can throw me out with nothing," she murmured. Beneath her, Cresttop Hill sat exactly where it had always been, unimpressed. Land didn't shout. But tonight it was wide awake, and in the morning, it was going to speak. By dawn, the party was over. But the night hadn't ended. It had just changed locations. What started as a shaky vertical clip had multiplied, edited, captioned, and stitched itself into something far bigger than Cresttop's living room. By 9 a.m., a hashtag with Cresttop's name and the word Nanny beside it sat in the trending bar. By 10, someone had dug up old interviews of Francis Arma talking about lifting people out of poverty and spliced them with his line, "You're here because I allow it." Inside Cresttop, the house felt smaller. Sharon sat at the dining table, laptop open, phone buzzing. "Francis, they're tagging the brands," she said, voice thin. "All of them. The car company, the bank. Look at this one. Do you sponsor people who humiliate their staff?" Across from her, Francis paced, tie abandoned over a chair. "It's just social media," he snapped. "It will move on. They always do." "Not this time," Sharon said. "Not when there's a face. Not when there's a name. They found Flora's personal Facebook. They're calling her Auntie Cresttop." Francis snatched the phone, looked, and cursed. He was not a man who surrendered to hashtags. He was a man who crushed problems. He picked up his own phone and dialed his head of security. "Get the car," he barked, "and find out where that woman lives. If she thinks she can embarrass me, she's about to learn what power actually means." While Francis plotted, Flora sat in a cramped office at the Lands Commission. It had the same tired cream walls and the same faint smell of paper and dust. But today, the man at the security desk looked up as she entered, eyes lingering for a second too long. He'd seen her face on a screen. In the office, 2 people waited. Dapa, the woman from the phone, and Mr. Kumi, a lawyer in a navy suit. "Miss Mensah," Kumi said, opening a folder, "the signature on the sale deed is a forgery. Our forensic team confirmed it. The slant, the pressure. It's not your grandmother's hand. Also, the supposed sale happened months after her death." Flora's eyes locked on the black ink that copied her grandmother's name crookedly. "So," she said slowly, "they built a mansion on land they never fully bought." "Correct," Kumi replied. "On paper, half of this hill still whispers your grandmother's name. We can file an injunction. But be warned, Francis Arma will not go quietly. He will fight. He will get dirty." "I want my grandmother's name back," Flora said. That afternoon, Flora's phone rang. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Francis. "You think you're clever, Flora?" His voice came through the speaker, low and dangerous. "Mr. Arma," she replied steadily. "I have the police sitting in my office right now," he said. "I can tell them about the jewelry that went missing last month. I can tell them about the cash from the safe. Who do you think they will believe? The billionaire or the disgruntled nanny who wants a payout?" Flora's hand tightened on the phone. The threat was real. In this city, truth often lost to influence. "Are you threatening to frame me, sir?" she asked. "I'm giving you a choice," Francis said. "Drop this ridiculous claim, issue a public apology for the misunderstanding, and I will give you 6 months' salary. Or continue, and I will make sure you never work in this country again." Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. But then she looked out the window of the trotro she was riding. She saw the dust, the hawkers, the struggle. And she remembered Abena counting crumpled notes. "Mr. Arma," she said, "if you send the police to my house, tell them to wear good boots." "What?" he snapped. "Because to arrest me," she said, "they will have to cross land that belongs to me, and I do not give them permission to enter." She hung up. Back at Cresttop, Francis threw his phone against the wall. Sharon stood in the doorway, watching the glass shatter. "You threatened her?" Sharon asked, incredulous. "A woman who bathed our son? I'm protecting this family," Francis roared. "She is a fraud." "Is she?" Sharon asked quietly. "Or are you just scared because for the first time you can't buy your way out? Whose side are you on?" I'm on the side that doesn't go to prison, Francis," she said. "You are fighting a ghost, and you are losing." The injunction landed at Cresttop like an unwelcome guest. A court order froze the land. No sale, No refinancing. No movement. The banks called, worried about their collateral. The PR firm called, dropping the contract. Francis Armagh was trapped in his own castle. 2 days later, Flora walked through the gates of Cresstop, not in a uniform, not carrying a tray. She walked through the front door, flanked by Mr. Kumi. Francis and Sharon waited in the living room. It looked different in daylight, less magical, more like a set after the lights are turned off. "Flora," Sharon began, voice soft. "Thank you for coming." "Good afternoon, madam, Mr. Armagh," Flora said. "Let's not waste time," Francis said, his jaw tight. "How much?" "Mr. Armagh," Kumi began. "My client is not here for—" "Mr. Armagh," Flora cut in calmly. "You spoke to me, directly the last time. Do me the courtesy now." Francis looked at her, really looked at her. "I made a mistake," he mumbled. "I was angry. I'm willing to compensate you." "Yesterday," Flora said, "you told me I was here because you allowed it. Today, a court paper says you are here partly because my grandmother allowed it. You want to talk about jokes, Mr. Armagh?" This is the punchline. Sharon closed her eyes briefly. "We didn't know about the forgery, Flora. We trusted the developers." "Maybe you didn't sign the fake paper," Flora said, "but you built your life on a hill without ever asking whose footsteps were there first." "We are offering a settlement," Kumi explained. "You acknowledge the original ownership. You correct the registry. You enter a formal lease agreement with Ms. Mensah as co-owner of the land." "You want us to tell the world we don't own our house?" Francis scoffed. "You want the world to continue believing," Kumi replied, "that you can throw out the woman who owns half the ground under your feet?" Silence stretched between them. Then, a small voice broke it. "Daddy, is Auntie Flora here?" Stephen ran down the stairs before anyone could stop him. He barreled into Flora's legs, wrapping his arms around her. "Are you going away?" he asked, voice wobbling. "Everyone online says Daddy was mean." Flora knelt. "I'm not going away, not yet." "Did Daddy say sorry?" he whispered. "He tells me to say sorry when I'm rude." Francis cleared his throat. He had stared down CEOs and ministers. He had never felt more exposed than now, in front of a 6-year-old. "Stephen," Francis said slowly, "Daddy made a mistake. He was rude to someone important." "More important than the president?" Stephen asked. Francis looked at Flora, then back to his son. "In this house?" "Yes." He turned to Flora, and for the first time his shoulders dropped. "Ms. Mensah," he said. "Flora, I'm sorry. For my words. For the threats. For standing on your grandmother's legacy as if it were my throne. I cannot undo what I said, but I can change what I sign." He picked up the draft agreement. "In front of my wife, my son, my landlady," he managed. "We will recognize half of this hill as belonging to the late Abena Mensah, and we would be honored if you allowed our family to remain here under a formal lease." Flora turned to Kumi. "Is it fair?" "It is better than many would offer," Kumi said. "And sometimes power is knowing when to say enough." She turned to Sharon. "I don't want your children to lose their home," Flora said. "I just don't want them to grow up thinking they are above the people who build and clean it." "They won't," Sharon promised, eyes bright. "Not after this." Flora took the pen. Her hand did not shake. She signed beside her grandmother's name, completing a circle started on a dusty day decades before. A week later, Cresstop hosted another gathering. No champagne towers. Just a small podium on the lawn and a semicircle of cameras. Francis stepped up to the mic, papers in hand, face sober. "Good afternoon," he began. "Recently, a video of me speaking disrespectfully to a member of my staff went viral. My behavior was arrogant. It reflected a belief that because I have wealth, I am above those who work in my home. What you did not know, what I also did not know, was that the person I spoke to is the rightful heir to half of the very land this house stands on." He gestured to the ground. "We have corrected the records. We have entered into a formal agreement with Abena Mensah's granddaughter, Miss Flora Mensah, as our land partner." He stepped aside. Flora stood behind him. Plain dress, natural hair, eyes steady. A reporter raised a hand. "Ms. Mensah," How does it feel to go from being called the help to being half owner of Crestop Hill? She stepped forward slightly. She didn't smile for the cameras. She spoke to the history. My grandmother used to say, she replied, that land doesn't shout. It just waits. For years, people laughed at her for buying a rocky hill. They laughed at me for thinking a nanny could challenge something so big. Today is not about me feeling powerful. It's about remembering that the people we step on might be the ones holding us up. She looked down at the earth, then back at the lens. I hope the next time someone thinks of talking down to just the help, they remember this hill. The clip of her words joined the old clip of her humiliation online. Side by side, they told a fuller story of how a quiet black woman, dismissed as just staff, turned out to hold the title deed to the ground under a billionaire's feet. And far below Crestop, in neighborhoods where people held crumpled papers from decades ago, more granddaughters started to ask quiet questions about hills and signatures, and who really owns what. Because once land finds its voice, it teaches others how to speak. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.